The point, I'll call to order the Committee of the Whole for Tuesday, December the 12th. Looking to the agenda, are there any changes or additions? I'm guessing not. In which case, I'll move the agenda if there's no changes or additions. Everybody's zoned out over there, not listening to me. I'll move the agenda be approved as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Look into the minutes of November 14th, Committee of the Whole. Are there errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll move they be adopted as presented. Those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried unanimously. Moving on to item D1, the Garburator impact on the wastewater system study. Mr. Cole.
All right. Good afternoon, Mayor Borman, members of council. So, yeah, I'm here this afternoon to talk about a study that was completed last month and to share the results with council. Before we get into it, what I did want to do was to give a little bit of history on the Garburator, let people know they have been around for a while, back to prehistoric times. And has evolved to a little cylindrical box underneath the sink to replace the prehistoric pig. The Garburator essentially takes food waste that's generated on the kitchen counter, shreds it into tiny little pieces. It goes through the wastewater system plant, and then at that point it would get separated out and combined with biosolids and be composted. That's how we would deal with it here in the town of Canmore, if we were to go that direction. So I thought it would also be beneficial to share some of the historical documents that have led us to this. It's not, the use of Garburators and diverting organic waste is certainly not a new subject for the town of Canmore, and so I wanted to just remind council and the gallery about some of the work that has been done in the past. So going back to 2012, we did a waste management study that specifically looked at SSO diversion. SSO being source separated organics. I will probably say that a few times, but that's what it means. Organic waste, SSO, etc. And we'll talk a little bit about that. We also did a characterization study to determine how much SSO or organic material we do have in our waste stream currently. And we looked at it through a number of seasonal situations to understand what the fluctuations are. And those details were shared with council last year. And then the last one, as I talked about, is the study itself, what I'm going to present this afternoon that was just completed last month. So going back to the waste management study, looking at it specifically, there was, at the time we were looking at comparing that to two different types of systems, almost like a hybrid system. Looking at option where we provide containers, which is the more common approach, what the town of Banff does and a number of other municipalities. Or looking at food waste disposers or FFWs or Garburators or incinerators as an option for diverting waste. And we looked at the pros and cons, and the one thing that did clearly stand out that was an unknown was what the impact would be on the wastewater system plant or system. So this is where that study came from to begin with. So the recommendation was to look at what was the most suitable option for the town. There was a number of answers we needed to get, questions we needed to get answers to, which is why we did this study. So we hired a consulting firm, and they broke out the study in three parts. One was to do a literature review, to go out to look at what other municipalities are doing. Often universities will do studies to understand what the impact is. People have vested interests, like the suppliers, for example. They went through and looked at those documents in detail. Then the next part was to look at what the loading would be, the impact on the loading based on the literature review, and the impact on the flows. So if it helps, the flows is the hydraulic capacity of a plant, so that's the volume of water coming through. The loading is the solids that are in that water, how diluted or not diluted or strong that material is, how much more a plant needs to work. So one thing is to move the water through, the other is to pull those solids out. Those are the two big significant work that the plant does. And the last one, based on looking at the research, what the impact would be on the plant, is now and looking at it with Garburator and without a Garburator, what would be the impact for us to do it here in the town of Canmore with our current wastewater system, and any capital upgrades that would be required. So before they got started, they needed to understand how much organic material are we talking about. So we have about 3,400 tons of residential waste. Our characterization study said 36% of that is organic material. Gives us about 1,200 tons of organic. When we go back and look at the characterization of what that included, that also included soiled paper, pizza boxes, things that can't go in the Garburator. So we had to actually further reduce that 1,215 tons to 67% of that to 815 tons, if that makes sense. All right, so that's what's available to us in the residential sector as of 2016 results, 815 tons of organic material in our waste stream, a residential waste stream. We didn't even look at the commercial, and when we look at the results of the study, it would have just made things more significant. So the review looked, for example, at the city of New York, Stockholm, Sweden, and it looked at a number of different parameters that we gauge our quality of our effectiveness of the wastewater treatment plant and our approval to operate. So we have to test for total suspended solids, so that's the stuff floating around in there. The BOD, so that's how much oxygen we need in there, in the water to deal with BOD, it's the amount of oxygen we need to break down the aerobic organisms that are in the water. Then we have phosphorus, which is a very sensitive topic that deals with algae growth in the river, so we have to ensure that we stay on top of our phosphorus production or how much phosphorus we discharge into the Bow River. Nitrogen as well, ammonia, which we're currently having a few struggles with at the wastewater treatment plant. And then finally, fats, oils, and greases, what's the impact on it? And it's a chronic problem for us and other municipalities in any system with a wastewater treatment plant has problems with fogs. And then actually what our water use is, and that's that hydraulic or that flow piece versus the loading piece. So the top parts are really around the loading, and the bottom one, the water use, is around the hydraulic or the flow piece. And you can see when they did the research, you could see when we hit 50%, and that is of the 815 tons, about half of it going into the wastewater treatment plant system, is we have an increase in TSS by 15% on average and 21%. Highlight that for total suspended solids. I'm just looking over here. Same thing with phosphorus. We have a max stay at 14% increase in solids, and if we go out to 100% or all 815 tons of that material going in per year, we increase our phosphorus levels by 28%. And we're already right now below the number, so any of these changes will have an impact on our ability to meet our approval to operate. And as we go through the report, you'll see that will prompt us to then look to do some significant upgrades at the wastewater treatment plant.
So help me understand this chart. So the top part, the parameter, 100% max is what, 100% of the organic material that is available flowing in, or what?
Yes, yeah. That's making a projection over 20 years if we were to hit 100%.
So if it was, whatever your number was, 800 tons or something, that was the max number, wasn't it?
Yes.
So if all of that was flowing through the wastewater treatment plant, that would be 100% of max, and those would be the results below that.
Exactly. Yeah, and to just help this would be the average, so the monthly average. However, the plant needs to be designed to deal with the peak demand. Right. So we would have to more likely meet these pressures put on the wastewater treatment plant.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah.
And then you can see here, there's not a lot of literature on fogs. However, what we did find, or they found, the consultant, was that it can increase it up to 800%, which is significant. having those things collecting in the system.
That would be bad, wouldn't it?
That would be bad, yes. And then on the water use side, what they found is it had very not real significant impact on the plant. People wouldn't be using that much more water. There's urban myth that they do require a lot of water. I don't believe that they do based on my own personal use at home, and this re-emphasizes that they don't use a lot. And so what this means is if everybody used it, what the impact would be is 4 liters per person per day to use a Garburator. And then the other thing it found, which was interesting because we've played around with this idea for a number of years, was the suggestion of biogas generation at the wastewater treatment plant. So the study found that municipalities that support or utilize the use of Garburators actually do generate biogas, which is typically methane. The benefits for doing that, the organic materials, generates a lot of hydrogen sulfide, which helps create methane when it's gone anaerobic. Also, you have the cost to put those in place, the food waste disposer upgrades, as well as the operating costs are often offset by the money that's saved in power and power and gas savings, because you can generate everything you need or almost everything you need for the plant through the biogeneration process. But the consultant's also telling us, and it's the same consultant incidentally that we had posed this question to a number of years ago, what is the likelihood of us being able to do it here with our plant and its size? And they said at this point, we're not at that scale to make it beneficial.
So to capture that, or to benefit from that, you have to have a burn facility, is that?
Sorry?
You need to have a burn facility or something to?
No. What this means is you can see right here these 2 circles. Right now they are essentially holding tanks for material before they go into this green building, which is where we press the sludge to make biosolids. This facility here can be converted so it can be covered, and we allow it to go anaerobic, and we collect a methane gas off of it. And so what we were told is these 2 would not be adequate. We would need to include up to 6 more. So we have the space to do it, but there's a significant capital cost.
You're capturing the methane through something like that.
Yeah.
And then what happens with the methane that you collect?
The methane goes into a facility that then converts it into electricity. So you basically would burn it, which would be
right. So that was my initial question. So you need a burn facility to benefit from the methane.
Yes.
But not there. Is that what you're saying? It couldn't happen there?
No, it would make sense to have it right beside it. And then that facility would then transfer the power to the wastewater treatment plant itself. Yeah, we're not at big enough yet. So as I said, the wastewater treatment plant won't have significant impact for water flow coming in with the introduction of Garburators. And you can see what the household consumption would be. It's 4 liters per capita per day is the LCD. On the loading side, as I said, assuming 100%, it does have an impact and would result, especially upgrades in the BAFS section of the wastewater treatment plant and the newly commissioned DAF system, which pulls solids out. And we'll take a look at what that means. So if we assume a 100% saturation rate, this is comparing the saturation rate to the capital upgrades that would be required. So what I did find interesting in this study is that up to the 25%, or about 200 metric tons, we wouldn't require a significant upgrade to the plant. It wouldn't actually have an impact at all. But then once we got closer to the 50 to 75%, or the 400 to 600 tons, then we're looking at about a $9 million expansion where we would have to add another seaside cell on the BAF system, as well as expand the new DAF that we just put into place. And they estimate that in 2017 dollars to be about $9 million. And then if we were to go full bore and actively try to encourage everybody to do it and divert 100% of it, then we're looking at still the DAF expansion, but adding another seaside BAF cell to the wastewater treatment plant. And that would be an about $11 million cost hit to the plant. So significant dollars and impact to the plant if we were to move forward.
So the more successful that process would be, the more expensive it ends up being on capital expenditure.
Exactly, yeah. And the one thing that we have learned from this, especially with the upset we had with the wastewater treatment plant at last Christmas, and we have our fingers crossed for this Christmas, is we need to pay closer attention to those parameters that I described that were in that initial table to begin with. Those, and some of them are starting to rise, even though we haven't put in a Garburator system. We do need to keep track of those because it's not really an increase in population, but really what our population is doing and what they're pushing down the line is what prompts us to do our expansions to the wastewater system plant. So that's the one especially big takeaway for me, is to monitor those more closely. We're meeting all of our conditions for their approval to operate, with the exception of ammonia from time to time this year because of the BAF upset we had, but some of those other ones are starting to creep up, and we need to just be aware of that and ensure that we have any upgrades that we do need to do ahead of time before we end up in a violation situation.
So understanding that these are not anything more than calculations based on some study. So somewhere between 25 and 50%, I mean, it knows 25% saturation, there's no significant impact, great. But if there was an approach to using carburetors as part of the SSO, say it hit 40%, so I mean, it stands to reason that before 50%, the system is starting to be taxed noticeably. So it doesn't like tip over at 50% and suddenly there's a significant impact. So what if, I mean, somewhere between 25% and zero capital costs and 50% and $9 million, isn't there sort of an in-between?
I think the way I look at it is, you know, if we, however we move forward, whatever council wishes to do with this SSO diversion program, I think there's an opportunity for carburetors. How actively we promote it or encourage it, we just, whatever that impact is, we need to watch those parameters. What I would say is, I think we have some room to encourage carburetors. That's my opinion. What I like is that 25 to 50% is that buffer before we are now exposed to having to pay significant dollars to upgrade. That's how I look at that 25 to 50. Trying to go in and remember this was a desktop exercise. We're going to have to, however we move forward, we're going to have to continue watching those parameters to decide, because maybe at 40% we need to put those in, do that upgrade. You know, it's the margin of error there is, of course, when it's a desktop exercise like this. Mm-hmm. So I think if we, whatever we do, if we follow those parameters and monitor them, mm-hmm. then we can ensure that we're ahead of it.
And the study never tried to ascertain how many carburetors are actively in use today?
No,
so,
yes.
I mean,
no, you're right.
Arguably, it could be that we're, you know, 25% is already.
You know, maybe if this is a good sample of the community, show of hands, how many have a Garburator and use it?
Okay.
Dude, I don't even have a dishwasher.
More than 25%.
25%, yeah. So that gives us a little bit more, because we're already, a number of us are, oh, I should have had my hand up too. A number of us are currently using it, and that is already impacting the plant. And so what we're finding out, we can go at least another 200 tons, which is significant volume. And then that 200 to 400 is where we need to just be cautious.
Mr. Soto?
Sorry, I'm wondering if, Your Worship, you'd allow me to ask a question of Mr. Como.
Yeah, you bet.
Andres, we did ask a question on one of our censuses several years back about, do you have a Garburator? Do you recall if we got any data from that? I was just quickly trying to look back. Anyways, at one point when we were first starting to think about using Garburators as an organics diversion tool, we did want to understand the saturation rate, and so had asked it on as a census question, but I can't seem to find that information.
Okay.
The one, yeah, I don't recall what it is either, Mr. Soto, but I do remember during the waste characterization study that knowing that a number of us, and just the sample was about 25% or more, are using it, the waste characterization demonstrated to us that we are still very similar and not better than many other municipalities when it comes to organic. We have still the same amount of volume of organic in our system than a lot of other municipalities have that don't have Garburators. So it's hard, it's really difficult to say what, you know, even though we do have a number of people doing it, even if we knew what it was, we still have a lot of organic material in our waste stream as it is that we want to pull out.
Okay.
And the study also suggested a number of other things for us to think about and moving forward. So they didn't really look at this in great detail, but just ensuring that we're just aware that as we add more solids, especially parts of the community that don't have a lot of flow, sometimes they can settle out and solidify in the pipes. Lift stations have to do more pumping, so there's some impact there. Capacity, as I mentioned, organic material, when it's stagnant, can generate hydrogen sulfide, that rotten egg smell, so we may put ourselves at risk of having increased odors at the wastewater treatment plant, and then the pumps as well. Equipment just hammering that much more. Sometimes people will put the wrong things down, like a banana. If it happens to get through the Garburator, it's very stringy and can cause problems for pumps as well. So just things for us to consider and monitor.
So how much, as part of this study, did the consultant focus on the question of odors generated?
The only portion they talked about is that they highlighted as a risk, difficult to quantify, and just experiences from other jurisdictions with the generation of hydrogen sulfide.
So in the original capital budget description, it indicated the study would review odor-related impacts in the collection system and the lift stations. So did that part of it not occur, that part of the study?
No, no.
How come? I mean, it was in the description of the capital project, but that just didn't happen.
Well, I think it's just difficult to quantify. Their feeling is that when it, you know, specifically to to a lift station, it has a wet well in there. So how they work is sewage gets dumped in there typically by gravity. It gets up to they allow it to get to a certain point, and then they pump it and give it a boost to go by gravity to another system. When a wet well, it has a lot more organic content in there, then it has a significant risk of increased hydrogen sulfide creating gases. I think it was difficult for them to say what exactly that would be because odors are very subjective, and it depends on where they are in proximity to homes and so on. So there's a lot more at play, and maybe it was, I believe it was not specifically looked at because it was a very difficult and complex discussion to have.
Do you know if there's any anecdotal information on that in other communities that depend on Garburators to a larger degree?
No, other than the town of Canmore itself, and that we have people that are using Garburators, and from time to time we do have odors, and they are really in only two locations. It's our clarifiers at the wastewater treatment plant when there's a system upset. So generally we are able to accommodate it, and then we've been having some issues with lift station 10 out along the Three Sisters Parkway. And those are really the only two that we are aware of that have been shared with us from the community.
Okay, thanks.
So in summary, they are in use. We don't know how much. And also, if we were to add an additional 25% of what we have on the residential side, there's no impact on the plant. Once we go beyond 50%, we will have an impact and will be a significant capital cost for us to move the program forward. And the other one, as I said, the takeaway for at least administration and EPCOR as the operators of the wastewater treatment plant is to ensure that we continue to follow the different parameters and start to see how they're trending so that we stay ahead of anything. Based on that, we feel the next steps, and we've already begun to work on this because we've had a chance to look at this report for quite a while. In its draft stage is to start developing an implementation plan. And at this point, we're looking at exploring a hybrid system where we will now, because at this point we haven't been actively encouraging people to use Garburators. It's, if someone asks us, we'll say, yeah, go ahead, I do it. But we haven't had a formal program out there to encourage it. So that's one option that administration's exploring, in combination with a community composting program as well, so a bin system out in the neighborhood. So I think we will, I believe we will have likely more success because some people are comfortable with the Garburator, some people are not. They have different options, and we hope that we'll get better uptake in a program, whatever that is. So we're exploring those, what the costs are, where things are going to go after they're collected and so on, and develop a plan, and our wish is to bring it back to council mid-2018 ahead of the 2019 budget process for council's hopeful support and consideration.
Right. So at that time you'll have some suggestions, recommendations around possibility of envisioning a hybrid system that would incorporate Garburators as well as a container composting system.
Yes.
But at this point, the message regarding Garburators is they're okay.
They're okay.
Because I've been holding off for this study to decide whether to put one in my house or not, because it's already wired for one. But so I think I will.
I would encourage you to do that.
There you go. Yeah. Okay, Councillor McCallum, you have a question?
Yes. Thanks for your presentation on this. I will get me a Garburator as well. In the presentation last week we had from the core group, they indicated that there's FCM funding to help explore some of these solutions. Have we looked into any of that, those funding opportunities?
Yes, we have, and we were aware of those funding opportunities, yes.
I was as well, but I just wasn't sure if... Thank you.
Councillor Hillstad?
I didn't hit my button.
You didn't hit your button. I thought you had a question. Sorry. Councillor Sanford does.
Thank you, Worship. Thank you for your presentation, Mr. Como. I had a question for you regarding, we're currently doing a little bit of organics collection, right, with pumpkins and apples and things like that.
Leaf and yard waste, yes.
Yeah, and I mean the leaf and yard waste is just going to the landfill, isn't it, to be recycled?
Yes.
But the pumpkins are going with the solid waste. Is that correct?
They're going with they're collected and combined with the biosolids.
The biosolids,
yes.
Okay. Are you finding that people are being relatively good about what they put into the pumpkin bin in terms of contamination?
No.
So they're not, what I've heard about container collection systems for organic waste is that they're easily contaminated because people are not very aware or very considerate about what they put into the waste, but we're sort of doing that with pumpkins. So what is your experience with pumpkins?
Yes, pumpkins, no different. The operators will find a black garbage bag in there with household waste mixed in with the pumpkins. So it's troublesome for sure. If we go beyond that to the Beyond Curbside program, so we have a glass bin and someone will throw in a broken lawn chair in with the glass. And so, yeah, we have contamination in all of our programs. You know, the household hazardous waste. People are bringing things there that shouldn't be there and so on. So, but I don't think we're any different than other jurisdictions. The plan we want to bring forward, we'll certainly be putting significant costs so that we have the right resources and expertise to develop a very effective promotion and education program so that we assist people who are struggling with making the right decisions and what containers to put things in. And, you know, a reminder that if you're not going to use it properly, then please don't use it at all.
Okay, so that's what I've heard from other jurisdictions, is that contamination is a big problem.
Yes.
And keeping the organics pure enough for the different uses available is the big issue. So you've already considered that, and you have some experience with it, so thank you.
Yes.
Councillor Seeley.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thanks for your presentation, Mr. Como. I have a very similar question. Lessons learned from other communities as far as contamination management. Is there anything, Jasper and Banff are both doing it, is there anything that they've learned, anything that can be effective in that area?
The one I can share is people, depending on how people collect it in their homes, they may collect it in a bag, or they want to line the container with a bag so it doesn't smell when they dump it out. However we go forward is using a debagger. So it sends all the material through and pulls all this loose baggage out, which that's one of the biggest contaminations, is putting that type of equipment in somewhere in the system before it goes to the end composter or market.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from members of council or administration at this time? Seeing none, thanks very much for the report and the work that's being done. This is an important issue in our community, and I'll be looking forward to having a conversation in 2018 around this proposal for a hybrid system.
Thank you.
Now we will turn to item D2. The Quarry Lake Off-Leash Pilot Report, Ms. Risling-Wynn.
I feel like we're really close today. The podium's
That thing
really
is
far
sort of
forward.
isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. All the love. Good afternoon, Mayor Borman, members of council. I'm here this afternoon to present the summary of the Quarry Lake Off-Leash Dog Park to you. My intent to share with council this afternoon is what we saw, heard, and observed over the pilot period up at Quarry Lake. And before we get started, I just would like to acknowledge that, as we know, there's certainly passion been expressed in the community around dogs and the decision-making around how people and dogs use the valley. We also know there's passion in the community for coexisting and living with wildlife. And we recognize the community is interested in the next steps regarding the decision-making around Quarry Lake area. And we'd like to make the best decision regarding the best use of the area in the future, and one that will result in positive outcomes for both wildlife and humans in the valley. So we certainly recognize we want to get this decision right. So I'll just go over the pilot quickly, what the intent was and how it was laid out, some observations from during the pilot period, and items for consideration, and then follow up with a summary. So a bit of history regarding how the pilot came to be. You'll recall that two of the recommendations from the Human Use Management Review included reconsidering the boundaries of Quarry Lake Dog Park to accommodate a swimming area for dogs, and also investigating the feasibility of more opportunities for dog parks. So with that in mind, the pilot was developed in consultation with subject matter experts and key stakeholders. And we also knew that use of the area outside the formal dog park was being used and has been for quite a few years. So the intent was to designate a formal trail and delineate use at the pond, concentrating use in this area, thereby reducing use elsewhere. We also intended to protect the remaining riparian and amphibian habitat at the dog pond. Again, there'd been ongoing use, and we were hoping to address some of the issues with impacts that had already been established at the pond itself. And then finally, just a reminder regarding the number of licensed dogs within the community, 1,480, and that's only licensed dogs here in Canmore. It doesn't include dogs coming from other communities with tourists or dogs that aren't licensed in town. So this is just an overview of the pilot area. The bright green is the meadow, so that was the historic dog park. The blue is the 1 kilometer loop trail that was established. This little wedge of green is access to the pond, sort of that 4-bay beachy kind of area. And then the hatched area is the larger habitat patch, where we know that off-leash dog use historically has happened in that area, and people can use that area. You can walk and hike through that area, but your dog does need to be on a leash. So this is some of the signage that was put up as part of the pilot, sort of letting the community know what the pilot was about and the intent behind it. So just some details to better manage off-leash dogs, keep your dog under control and within 5 meters of the trail. You may use the pond, but only in designated areas. So some of the key information that was important for the community to know with respect to the pilot. This was a sign that specifically went up at the pond area, talked about amphibian habitat, respecting the boundaries, ensuring that dogs are on a leash outside the off-leash areas, a small inset map of where off-leash and on-leash use was meant to be, example of some of the amphibians that have been reported within the pond itself over previous years, and a request to the community not to tamper with the buoy. So the signs were put up throughout the pilot area. This is the blade sign that was installed. There were 8 of these on the 1 kilometer loop trail, and the signage indicating to keep your dog within 5 meters. This was the signage at the pond itself, as well as the buoy and the riparian fence that was installed to restrict access from the far shore. And then these signs were put at a couple of key points, and these are sort of the redirect signs. And they were put in 2 key locations where we were seeing people exiting the meadow area, moving into the larger habitat patch. So one was at that corner towards Canmore Creek along the Spray Lakes Road. That's the photo on the left. And the other one is at the TransAlta Gate, because we know people occasionally park in that area just off the Spray Lakes Road and then walk in from that position as well. So the signs were saying you're entering a habitat patch, why they're important, and then if you intend to go beyond this point, please have your dog on a leash. If you would like to carry on walking your dog off leash, please turn around and go back to the meadow or use the 1 kilometer loop trail. So bylaw was able to provide us with their observations from throughout the pilot program period. So they did 305 patrols in the area, issued 25 tickets and warnings, and there were 9 reported incidents, 4 of those being animal control related. So according to some users, it was expressed that the signage wasn't adequate to delineate the pilot area, which presented some challenges to enforcement. Some users stated that the borders of the pilot area were unclear and unmarked in some areas. And the signage wasn't permanent, and it was 2 of those blade signs were pulled out right shortly thereafter after they were installed, so that was problematic as well. Bylaw spoke to many people in the area who were outside the prescribed zones, and they generally expressed confusion with the mapping and the signage. And in these instances, no documentation was collected because no offense could be articulated.
Do you prefer we hold questions till you're finished?
Whatever you'd like, yeah.
Don't want to waste Mr. Orr's time, so since he's here, I have a question for him. So the patrols that I noted, the slide is 305, and in the report it notes that there was 230 patrols, 71 of which were with more than 1 officer. So in those situations, would say it was 2 officers, would they patrol together or separate, go off their own ways?
That's a very good question. So when we go to areas like this, we will document the patrols together in our reporting system. We do a mix. There are times where the officers will patrol together, and when dealing with an issue that can be as difficult as off-leash dogs and the reaction of owners. Typically it is good to have people together. I also was part of a number of patrols where we did separate and try and cover more ground. So I'd say there's probably about a 50-50 mix of those. Because of the way we document them and the way the reporting software works, we couldn't tell you exact numbers.
Thank you. And also in the report around bylaw observations, it notes during those patrols, 25 tickets/warnings were issued. Do you know the breakdown between actual tickets versus warnings?
I didn't provide those figures. I could break it down. The way our reporting software reports these things, it bunches them together because they're the same type of module in the software. I could go in there manually and break that down happily for you and provide that.
Just your guess. I mean, was the preponderance of those warnings, or were you issuing very many tickets?
There were some tickets issued. The majority were warnings. The reasoning for that was the difficulty with the signage again. If there's no strong delineation between where is on and off leash, it's very difficult to articulate an offense, and formulating those grounds can be very challenging.
Sure, I can imagine that. One other question from that part of the report is around it notes that during the pilot period, 9 incidents were reported to bylaw services. Can you just expand a little bit on that? What do you mean by incidents? What constituted an incident?
So an incident is a call for service. So when we receive a call for service, we generate a case report. So anytime we use that term, it means that someone called and reported an incident to us.
But is an incident like interaction between a dog and wildlife, or just simply a dog off leash? Is that an incident?
Yes. Anything that the member of the public calls in and reports to us, we generate a case report. So, speaking to that specific area, the majority of, I guess, incidents or case reports that are generated in that region are typically animals at the lake itself where they're prohibited, or they're conflict between users at the park, typically an aggression or a dog bite or something like that.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Councillor Sanford, you had a question?
Yes, I had another question for Mr. Orr just before he sits down.
Absolutely.
If you mentioned that there were patrols, 305 individual patrols, with using the calculation of however many officers were doing it at the time. I know that there was a big education campaign that took place as well. And I know from a lot of dog users that they observe bylaw up at the dog park presenting coffee vouchers, etc. So when you were doing that, when you were interfacing with the public in the education part, would that have been an opportunity to patrol as well, or is that two separate kind of events?
No, those would be one and the same. Anytime we're in an area conducting a patrol, that is documented as that. So what you were when you were speaking about the coffee vouchers, that's our positive ticketing program. Mm-hmm. So when we encounter people who are being compliant to try and do some positive reinforcement, we'll hand out things like coffee cards and that, and those would be documented as a patrol as well. Some patrols we might go out and hand out 10 of those, and they're just basically tracked by how many we're signing out of the office. So they would be included. So you were doing that in the off-leash area, though, is that correct? Like
we do them in both.
Yeah,
okay.
Depending, like sometimes, I know there's issues in off-leash parks with, members of the public not picking up after their animals, and if we see people who are being very responsible, we'll positively enforce by doing that, and so on. So that's what you're looking for in the off-leash, is how people are managing their pets and typically, yes, picking up waste? Okay. Yeah. All right, thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you.
So we've mostly covered the bylaw observations, but just the last piece being that positive feedback was received as well from a number of people who were using the area regularly, expressing that they enjoyed the larger off-leash area and they really appreciated the diversity of the dog walking experience. So being able to walk in the meadow, to be able to walk on the 1 kilometer loop trail, and if they happen to have a dog that liked to swim, that they appreciated that opportunity as well. So we were able to access camera data from 4 of the cameras from the human use monitoring project, and recall this monitoring was done in partnership with Alberta Environment and Parks. So the yellow circled area are the 4 cameras that data were collected from. These cameras were not directly within the pilot area, and you'll also recall that the study design placed the cameras at random locations throughout the valley, and they were in areas adjacent to the pilot area, therefore providing information regarding use in the larger Quarry Lake habitat patch. So from the data, we were able to separate it into 2 different time periods. So the pre-pilot period, which was from the middle of the summer 2015 until August 2016, so the pre-pilot period, and then from August 2016 to August 2017, which was when the pilot was put in place. So the number of on and off leash dogs in the area were captured on these 4 cameras, both prior to the pilot and then during the pilot period. So the results were consistent with the findings reported by Alberta Environment and Parks for the broader human use management monitoring analysis, that a number of dogs still continue to be off leash, captured by remote camera. So there was about a 5% change with dogs on and off leash within that larger Quarry Lake habitat patch area during the pilot period, during which time the community was encouraged to use the expanded off-leash area that was, defined by the pilot.
So, do you have any idea what the sample number was that's based on?
So I could go back and look at that data. I don't recall the number. I looked at a lot of files. There were hundreds, literally hundreds, yeah.
So when we're talking about the number of on and off leash dogs, it's not 5% of 72, it's 5% of a big number.
Yeah, and I can certainly follow up with the actual numbers versus the percentage if that's meaningful.
I remember hearing some of the data from the whole camera survey, so I have a sense of the number. It's a lot.
Yep, yeah. So this next slide is, again, data from Alberta Environment and Parks, and it demonstrates the historic use of the larger Quarry Lake habitat patch by black and grizzly bears. And I provided it in the report because it's, again, information that probably should be considered as Council determines what the next steps for use in the area will be. So we do know that black and grizzly bears do use this area. This is data from 2001 until 2016, so it's a long time frame, but what it does demonstrate is continued use over that time period of both species of bears. So again, this information could be considered when deciding on management actions in the future, especially with respect to ongoing use. So this demonstrates the Schipperdia removal that we undertook, again, in partnership with Alberta Environment and Parks for 2016 and 2017. These are areas in Rundleview and also this large piece in the middle that actually is both within the habitat patch and also the pilot area. And it's provided to Council for information just in terms of, again, providing that recognition that we are doing attractant management throughout the community in areas of high human use, and that this may be a management action that would be required moving forward, depending on what type of human use was permitted in the area in the future.
I heard from a longtime resident of Rundleview just recently that the removal of the Schipperdias had really very noticeable effect. This past summer,
in terms of
seeing
bear activity.
far less bears wander around than he's used to, which is good to hear.
So the last piece is with respect to the amphibian and riparian habitat, and it does appear that the mitigations that were put in place, both the fence and the buoy, appear to be effective in protecting the amphibian and riparian habitat, and possibly some consideration for maintaining that infrastructure moving forward, regardless of what gets decided with respect to off-leash dogs. And if you haven't ever seen frog eggs, those are frog eggs from the pond. can't tell you what species they are, but
Okay.
pretty cool. Yeah, in the spring, you'd see them in the spring, yeah. So just in summary, many people did respect the boundaries of the pilot area and restricted their use to only those areas, but many also did not. Enforcement was a challenge due to confusion regarding the boundaries. Users did appreciate the expanded use and expressed support for ongoing use of that area. And there are a number of items for Council to consider when deciding on next steps. So there's no immediate urgency to determine the future of the pilot area. It's status quo for the time being, but a decision will need to be made at some point in the future. And administration does recommend that Council consider the information presented, along with any advice from the technical committee of the Bow Valley Human-Wildlife Coexistence Roundtable prior to making any decision.
It's a mouthful, isn't it? We should have come up with
It is a mouthful, yeah.
a better name that we could have turned into an acronym. Thanks for your report. Just on the last slide, so there was provincial involvement in approving the pilot, and you indicate there's no urgency in determining the future of the pilot, and that infers that the province is not anxious about the status quo right now?
Not at the moment. I think we're all thinking ahead to next summer and what may happen with respect to bears again and human use in the area. So there is that piece of it to keep in mind, but no requirement from the province at this time for us to make a decision. No.
Great. Thanks very much for your report. Did you have a comment, Councillor Sanford?
Thank you, Ms. Risling-Wien, for that. I guess one of the things I wonder about is, even if we delineated this trail really effectively and let people know exactly where they needed to go, where could our bylaw enforcement expand to do the enforcement? Because some of this is on provincial land and some of it is Town of Canmore. Is that correct? Maybe Mr. Orr could answer that?
The boundaries of the pilot area were within the land that we co-own with Rocky Mountain Heritage Foundation. So
that's our Town of Canmore land.
That's right, yeah.
But the cameras were put up outside of that boundary, right?
Yes.
So what we're using as data is not within the Town of Canmore, but within the...
It's within the Town of Canmore, but not on Town of Canmore land per se, for those particular cameras.
Okay, and so is that
still
enforceable?
Within the town boundary.
Is that enforceable by us, that area?
So, go ahead.
That's a very good question, Councillor Sanford. I recently sought legal opinion from our prosecutors with RMRF, and they're of the opinion that if an area is on provincial parkland and within the town boundary, we can in fact enforce if there's no inconsistencies between the laws. So when it comes to off-leash dog laws, our laws are consistent with the provincial park laws, and we could go out and enforce the Town of Canmore laws as long as it falls within the boundary.
So that would give you enforcement opportunity where those cameras were set up?
I'd have to look at the exact mapping of it, but as long as they're within the boundary, I believe so, yes.
Mr. Fish?
Could I just add that I just confirmed that a number of those cameras are located on the Quarry Lake parcel, which is quite large and does include a bunch of area west of that. So I don't know exactly where the camera locations are, but most of those 4 camera locations are on Town of Canmore land and certainly within the Town of Canmore.
Yeah. And that's part of the conversation that's happening now at the roundtable and within the technical working group, and hopefully will inform the discussion. We expect that coming out of the process, the province will take ownership of some of the need to enforce in some of those areas, and I wouldn't immediately jump to wanting to enforce on provincial lands, but...
No, but I think what we've been hearing from the community is that enforcement would be a welcome addition to to education. So
Yeah,
we have to just define what our role in that is very clearly, right?
you
So,
bet,
mhm.
right you are. Councillor Seeley?
Thank you, Your Worship. And to that point, the results of the pilot program and everything else have been a little disappointing. I'm wondering if part of the pilot could include enforcement to see if that changes people's habits.
Sorry, can you repeat the question? I'm not quite sure.
Right now, there hasn't been a lot of enforcement. There have been people by law walking around and everything else. But if we sent a community message saying that we do want this to work, because there's been a lot of people really, they love the area. But if we can say enforcement is going to be, well, we're going to move to enforcement as part of the pilot, just to see if it changes people's habits.
Right. So it essentially extending the pilot period or running it for a second year with potentially additional enforcement could certainly be a recommendation that council could put forward to suggest for next steps. Yeah.
My understanding, though, that enforcement, when it's not clearly defined, the parameters of the off-leash area is pretty much, well, next to impossible. If there's not a hard line, people will just say, well, I didn't know I was not in the right zone. So
Sure.
it's hard.
So maybe as part of the recommendation would be to better define it then, if we extend the probational period.
So that's the discussion that'll happen at a later date.
Yep.
It's not on the table right
Yeah,
now.
I think there has been some advice expressed that clear delineation with a fence could certainly provide that clarity. You're either in or you're out.
A fence would be expensive. Maybe we don't need a fence at this point, or maybe we don't need a fence period, but certainly the clear delineation could be helpful.
Yeah, and I think Mr. Orr might be able to speak to that. The clear delineation, is clear delineation feasible in terms of from an enforcement perspective in the absence of a fence?
I think it definitely is possible. The level of signage would have to be fairly significant. One of the big challenges about the area is that you almost have a web of trails inside that habitat patch that are inside the loop. And a lot of people were very much not aware that they couldn't go in there as well as around the loop. I'd honestly have to hear from a few experts on the issue when it comes to this type of thing to know exactly how much signage would be required. It's a very difficult question to answer. Right. I'm doing my best, but
well, from my perspective, being a dog owner and walking up there, I'm very clear on where the lines are, and if I choose to go over it, then enforcement is. But I think most locals get where the lines are. Our visitors maybe need a little bit more education, but I think we could do a better job of delineating
absolutely. That. And understanding that Quarry Lake is a destination dog park that includes a lot of local, but also a lot of visitor traffic. It is very challenging when you have people coming in from outside town who don't necessarily know those boundaries. That's where that very, very clear signage and borders would be required for us to be able to, just make it black and white where is in and where is outside that off-leash area. Because there's a lot of users out there who are not from town as well.
Yeah, thank you.
Councillor Hillstead?
This continues on the whole fencing or cleared markings. One option that we may want to consider is something like stakes, like just red stakes that are 3 feet high, and they just mark, and then wildlife can move in and out. Like, I've talked with a few people, and it's just something more to consider, not just to look into, I guess, because that would help with you. Like, if someone's past the stakes, they're out of bounds. So, just if that would help you, that'd just be one option to look at also.
I definitely think it could. Yes, I appreciate that.
Great. And this will be a discussion coming back to council some point in 2018. We don't need to resolve the issue today.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we expected after the report from
yeah.
the roundtable.
Yeah, and there'll be a technical working group report coming to the roundtable, and then a period of public engagement around a lot of what we've heard. So it'll be some time before this will be this stage of discussion, trying to make decisions and a lot of public engagement. Yeah.
Yes.
Thanks for your report, both of you. This time I'll move on to item E1. Soon as, I wonder if I should wait for Councillor Mara to come back. No. Okay, item E1, council updates. If anybody has any questions for another member of council in regards to any of their report areas? I have a couple of questions for Councillor Seeley around his report on TCK. So the vision statement that you note, inspiring the world to experience the mountain lifestyle, the next bullet refers to the established community brand. So in the vision statement, that mountain lifestyle, it's a little bit differently presented than the actual brand. So is there an intent to redefine how the town is promoted in the tourism sector?
I don't know. I wasn't part of those discussions. I just, I noted it because it was part of the meeting. That's what they decided. I don't know where they formulated that or what the intent is.
Okay. So was there any discussion at the meeting you had around? Hold on, is somebody over there with input?
Oh,
Dr.
here.
Cottle,
Oh.
Ms. Soto?
Yeah, both Ms. Cottle and I were thinking the same thing. The brand, as I recall, was that Camera is the premier mountain lifestyle destination. That was the vision of the branding exercise.
The brand is quite big, more than those two
Yeah,
words.
but from a tagline, experiencing the mountain lifestyle, I think is quite consistent with the original brand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and it does, the next bullet refers specifically to the established brand, so I'm assuming they'll continue to refer to that whole brand, which is a lot of text. Just curious. And also curious, and nobody may know the answer on this, but the destination marketing, a voluntary fee of 3%, it notes has been revised to a membership model, but in the old CB&T, there was a target of, well, a couple of $1 million in revenues required to operate that organization. I assume TCK has a much smaller operating budget in mind. Do you know anything about that?
No, basically the 3%, they kind of come to agreement with that, so they wanted to get something in place. Because it's
but the 3% isn't going to be collected.
3% is not going to be collected. They're replacing it with the package,
but
and it will be less.
Yeah. Do you know what their operating budget is proposed to be?
I don't know that right now. I can check though. Let you know.
I'm just curious.
It's certainly a lot less than the 3%. They just want to get the collection mechanism going again.
Do you know if the hotel sector, if those businesses continue to collect a 3% marketing fee for themselves, or?
I don't know. I don't think at this time, but I'm not sure.
Okay, are there any other questions from other members of council for any other member of council? I'm going to see that as nope. Moving on then to agenda item F1, service area reports. Usual format, we'll just go through the reports by areas. Any questions related to Section A, the CAO's office? Or Section B, municipal services? Section C, municipal infrastructure. I have a question. Mr. Orr's gone now. I should have encouraged him to stay, but So, well, it's more of planning. The discussion around the waves of stop orders going out, so there were 3 waves, I guess is to Mr. Park. 3 waves, approximately 25 in the first 3 waves. Under municipal infrastructure deed, first wave 3, 12, 20. Well, in the first 3 waves, there were 20 stop orders issued, and then another wave of 8. So that would be the 4th wave, I suppose. Has there been any, do you know if there's been any other actions initiated since the writing of this report?
So yes, my understanding is that the next wave of letters have gone out, and in addition, we are starting to take steps to identify those properties that are advertising not in compliance with the bylaw that have not necessarily been the subject of a complaint.
Okay. Great, thank you. Councillor McCallum?
Thank you, Your Worship. I was wondering, I remember reading, maybe not in this committee of the whole, but a previous committee of the whole, that some of the folks that were renting out rooms in their homes were actually, could have quite easily converted to a bed and breakfast. Do we know how many conversions to B&Bs? Because I understand we've lost quite a few B&B DPs over the last couple of years.
So just in the last few months, we have actually received a number of applications for B&Bs, new applications for B&Bs, I suspect as a result of this initiative.
Great.
But we're talking in the less than 10 as opposed to the tens or more number of applications.
Onesies, twosies. Perfect.
Yeah, so yeah, I the last I heard, I believe the number was around 8, but those are applications and I don't know how many have been approved up to this point.
Great, thank you very much.
In engineering, the first discussion point 2A around lighting Spring Creek Drive. So it notes there's a number of options to direct light more downward or diffuse the light, which are being investigated. So would that ultimate, if there's a solution that results from that investigation, would that then be available to homeowners in other neighborhoods?
So this is the only location where this particular problem has been identified as a result of the configuration of these lights. So it is location specific due to this particular bit of infrastructure. There are options for other locations depending on what the nature of the issue is, but this problem has not been identified elsewhere.
Okay, so describe the situation for me a bit more detailed in.
So my understanding is that due to the style of the streetlight in this particular location, they were going with a particular aesthetic. The light was not as directional and was therefore spreading out over a broader area than the other locations where we have used the LED lights, where there are the shielding and the screening is very specific and the lighting is very directionally oriented.
So the head itself on those lamp posts are different from everywhere else in town? Or?
Yes, they are.
That helps me understand quite a bit. Thank you. Councillor McCallum?
My question was quite similar. I just wanted to know if it was the actual luminaires itself that was coming from the lamp, or if it was just the light standard and how the light was shining from it. Thank you.
Just to be certain, and Mountain Creek Hazard Mitigation Stoneworks Creek Mitigation Design notes engagement undertaken includes adjacent landowners, so that would include CCHC? Yes. Thank you. Any other questions from other members of council regarding the service area reports? Seeing none, we'll move on to council resolution action list. I just have one question, motion, resolution 111-2017 around municipal election process approvals, having to do with the campaign signs. That's noted through the motion to return prior to May 28th. Do you know when that might be on the agenda? Anyone? Just curious, doesn't matter.
It currently hasn't been scheduled by admin, but we can have a discussion about bringing it sort of Q1 2018.
Sure. I mean, it'll be fairly simple presentation and discussion.
Mm-hmm. It is a land use bylaw amendment, so potentially we can consolidate it with some of the land use bylaw work coming forward.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions on the council resolution action list? Or anything else in the agenda? Seeing none, I'll move the committee of the whole be adjourned. Those in favor? Opposed? Oh? So I'll withdraw that motion. Move committee of the whole go in camera. Those in favor? Opposed? We're in camera. Verbal report, right? Opposed, we're adjourned. Bye.